She was laughing. Not the polite kind. Not the careful kind that women sometimes use in rooms where they are not entirely safe. This was the real thing, head slightly tilted, shoulders loose, the kind of laugh that comes from a person who feels completely, totally, at ease. And he was standing on a bridge, watching it happen. Yun Tae-gwon, a man who had never lost anything he decided to keep, stood completely still while the city moved around him. Cars, neon, the wet smell of Seoul after rain, none of it registered. Because down below, walking along the riverside path he had visited more times than he could explain, was Vera Noelle. And she was not alone. The man beside her was relaxed in a way that Tae-gwon had never allowed himself to be, laughing with her, present with her, unburdened, in the way that only a man with nothing to hide can be. Tae-gwon's hands tightened against the railing. He had told himself, for months, that there was time. There was always time. He understood, standing on that bridge in the rain, that he had told himself a lie. If you've ever held something real inside you for too long and watched it walk away, this story is going to sit with you. Stay with us. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we tell the kind of stories that don't let you go easily. Now, let me take you back to where this really started. Seoul is a city that does not slow down for personal reckonings. It moves, it hums, it layers neon over history and calls it progress. It is a city of surfaces, beautiful, deliberate, controlled surfaces, and Yun Tae-gwon had always felt at home in it for exactly that reason. He was 41 years old, unmarked by the life he lived in any obvious way. No visible scars, no dramatic tells, just a man in a perfectly tailored black suit who moved through rooms like he had already decided how they would end. His organization, quiet, precise, deeply rooted in the city's financial underbelly, ran on one principle: information is power and emotion is noise. He had lived by that principle for 20 years. Then a Kenyan woman with natural curly hair, a voice like slow water, and absolutely zero interest in impressing him, walked into a meeting room on the 14th floor of a building he quietly owned, pulled out her notebook, and began asking questions that no one had ever thought to ask him before. Not about his power, about his city. That was the beginning. And this is how it ended. She didn't ask about him. She asked about the mural on the wall behind him. That was the first problem. The foundation was called Sora Arts, named after a Korean word meaning sky, and on paper, it was exactly what it appeared to be: a cultural nonprofit supporting emerging artists in Seoul's less photographed neighborhoods. It hosted exhibitions. It funded residencies. It paid its taxes on time and kept its books clean. What it also did, quietly, was give Yun Tae-gwon a reason to exist in certain rooms without raising questions. Vera Noelle had been commissioned by a Pan-African cultural magazine to write a long-form piece on the intersection of African diaspora identity and East Asian urban art spaces. Seoul was one of 4 cities on her itinerary. Sora Arts was on her list because a Ghanaian sculptor whose work she admired had done a residency there the previous year and described it as the most human place I found in the city. She had not expected the meeting to include the foundation's primary funder. She had also not expected him to be so still. Most powerful men she had interviewed filled space aggressively, leaning forward, talking over silences, performing authority. Yun Tae-gwon did the opposite. He sat at the far end of the table like a man who had nowhere else to be and no interest in pretending otherwise. His eyes moved to her once when she entered. Then they moved to her notebook. He did not introduce himself. His assistant did that. Vera settled into her chair, uncapped her pen, and looked around the room the way she always did before an interview, cataloging the space, reading its textures. There was a painting on the wall behind Tae-gwon, large, abstract, deep indigo layered over burnt orange in a way that made the colors fight and somehow resolve. "Who painted that?" she asked. Not hello, not thank you for having me, not the standard opener that telegraphed deference. Just who painted that. Tae-gwon blinked, A barely visible pause. A young woman from Busan, he said. She did the residency 3 years ago. She lives in Berlin now. Do you know her work? I know that painting. Vera looked at him then, properly, the way she looked at things she was deciding whether to understand. Then she wrote something in her notebook and moved on. He spent the rest of the meeting watching her write. He told himself it was a habit, force of nature, the same instinct that made him read every room. He was not entirely convincing. He had a rule, never learn unnecessary details about people. He had broken it 17 times since Tuesday. All 17 were about her. He did not seek out information about Vera Noelle. He simply received it. The way a man in his position receives everything, through proximity, through the natural accumulation of detail that happens when you pay attention, and your attention is very, very good. She was staying in Mapogu, in a small apartment sublet from a Korean Senegalese ceramicist she had met through an artist residency network. She visited the same Pajangmacha 3 mornings in a week, the one on the corner near the overpass, where the heat guk was made with extra doenjang the way the older Busan-style vendors used to make it. She spoke Korean with a specific kind of careful precision that suggested she had learned it as a grown woman, not a child, deliberate pronunciation, occasional pauses where she chose her words with visible respect for the language. She carried 2 notebooks, one for work, one for something else, he did not know what. Tae-gwon knew these things the way he knew most things, without having specifically asked. Information moved toward him. It always had. What was different was what he did with it. Normally, details about a professional contact were filed and forgotten once useful. He had no system for details that were simply interesting. No category for information that had no strategic application, but that he found himself returning to anyway, the way a tongue finds a loose tooth. The Pajangmacha detail bothered him specifically. He had passed that stall 100 times. He had never stopped. She had been in Seoul for 11 days and had found it by the 3rd. What else was she finding that he had walked past without seeing? He approved a second meeting with the Foundation's Arts Committee without being asked to. He told his assistant it was a due diligence visit. His assistant, who had worked for him for 9 years and survived by being incurious, did not comment. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Vera spent 40 of them in conversation with a young Congolese-Korean painter about pigment sourcing. Tae-gwon sat at the edge of the room and watched her listen, the quality of her attention, the way she did not rush the painter's halting sentences, the small sound she made when something surprised her. He left before the meeting formally closed. In the car, the city moved past the window in streaks of light. He looked at none of it. She said it reminded her of a bridge in Nairobi. He had never thought about Nairobi before. He thought about it for the next 6 days. It happened on a Thursday evening in October, when the air in Seoul had turned that specific shade of cool that made the city smell like iron and chrysanthemums. Vera had stayed late at the Foundation to finish a recorded interview with one of the resident artists. Tae-gwon had no reason to still be in the building. He was there anyway, in a glass-walled office on the upper floor, reviewing documents that could have waited until morning. He told himself they couldn't. When he came down, she was standing in the lobby pulling on her coat, a long camel-colored thing that looked like it had been worn through several cities before Seoul. She looked up when the elevator opened. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "You're still here," she said, not surprised, just nodding it. "So are you," he replied. They walked out of the building at the same time without discussing it. The street was quiet. The kind of Thursday evening quiet that Seoul reserves for the spaces between rush hour and nightlife, when the city exhales. She turned left. He turned left. They walked half a block before either spoke again. "There's a bridge," she said, not looking at him. "About 10 minutes from here. I found it my first week. You can see 4 different neighborhood lights from the middle of it." He knew the bridge. He had crossed it in cars his entire life without ever standing on it. "Show me," he said. She did. They stood in the middle of the bridge for almost 20 minutes. She pointed out the lights, the pinkish glow of the Hongdae district, the cooler blue of the high-rises further north, the warm amber of an older residential neighborhood tucked between them like something the city had forgotten to modernize. "It reminds me of a bridge in Nairobi," she said. "Over the Nairobi River. My grandmother lived near it. I used to sit on it when I needed to think." He looked at her profile. The city light caught the edges of her hair. "What did you think about?" he asked. She smiled, small, private, pointed toward the lights rather than at him. "Everything I hadn't figured out yet." He looked back at the city. Something moved through him that he did not try to identify. They walked back separately. He returned to the bridge alone the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. He never told her. He had ended negotiations worth millions with 2 sentences. He could not finish one honest sentence with her. He was starting to find that unacceptable. There was an evening, mid-November, the rain coming down in that thin, persistent Seoul way that soaks without announcing itself. When they sat across from each other in a small restaurant near the foundation, and Tae-gwon came the closest he had ever come to saying something real. It was not a planned dinner. She had been caught in the rain outside the building. He had seen it from the window. He had gone down. He had suggested the restaurant across the street with the same flat practicality he used for everything, and she had agreed with the same unbothered ease she had for everything, and they had sat down and ordered and been quiet together in a way that had started to feel, to him, alarmingly natural. She was telling him about a story she was working on, a piece about second-generation Korean African families in Seoul, children who carried 2 languages and 2 memories, and belonged completely to both and fully to neither. She spoke about one family in particular, a mother from Cameroon and a father from Daejeon, whose daughter had started writing poetry in a language she invented herself, a private fusion that was all her own. She said she made the language because neither one alone had the word she needed, Vera said. She wasn't looking at him when she said it. She was looking at her tea. Tae-gwon sat with that for a moment. "What was the word?" he asked. Vera looked up. "She wouldn't tell me. She said some things only make sense in the language built for them." The rain tapped against the window. The restaurant was warm and smelled of doenjang and sesame. He looked at her across the table and felt the sentence form, the real one, the one that had been building for weeks without his permission, and he opened his mouth. His phone buzzed. Twice, the specific pattern that meant something required him immediately. He looked at the screen. He had to go. "I have to go," he said. She nodded, no visible disappointment, no performance of understanding, just acceptance. That was almost worse. He paid for the tea and left. In the car, he sat in silence for 3 full minutes before telling his driver to move. The sentence he hadn't finished sat in his chest like a stone. He told himself he would say it next time. He told himself that for 6 more weeks. She didn't leave in anger. She didn't leave with tears. She left the way self-respecting people leave quietly, completely, and without waiting to be watched. Vera Noelle was not a woman who required grand declarations. She had never needed a man to perform feelings for an audience. She did not need flowers or scripted moments or the kind of romantic gesture that was more about the giver's image than the receiver's heart. What she needed, what she had always needed, was something much simpler and much harder. She needed to feel chosen. Not implied, not hinted at, not filed away under maybe and someday and the particular silence of a man who felt everything and said nothing. By December, she had been in Seoul for 4 months. Her article was finished and submitted. Her reasons for staying were technically professional, a follow-up piece, a second round of artist interviews, an invitation to speak at a small cultural forum in Itaewon. But if she was being honest with herself, which she always was, she had also been staying to see if something would happen. It hadn't. She sat in her Mapogu apartment on a Tuesday night, her second notebook open in her lap, the one that wasn't for work, and she read back through 3 months of her own observations. Small things. The way he had appeared downstairs in the rain. The bridge. The unfinished dinner. The way his eyes moved to her first whenever she entered a room and then moved away just as quickly, like he was correcting himself. She understood what it all meant. She was not naive. What she also understood was that understanding a man's feelings and receiving them were two entirely different things. And she had spent enough of her life doing emotional translation work for people who could not be bothered to speak their own truth. She closed the notebook. She called her friend Amara, made plans for the weekend, and began, gently, deliberately, the process of releasing something that had never properly been offered to her. She did not cry. She did not send a message. She simply let go. 3 weeks later, at a rooftop gathering in Yongsan, hosted by a mutual friend in the arts community, Vera met Mike Kane. He was from Accra. He told urban stories through documentary film. He had a way of asking questions that made people feel like the most interesting person in the room. He was warm in the way that some people simply are not performing warmth, not deploying it strategically. Just warm, the way the sun is warm, without effort and without conditions. He asked Vera about her work. She told him. He listened like he meant it. He asked if she'd like to see a cut of his latest project over coffee sometime. She said yes. She said it without hesitation. And across the city, in a building near the Han River, Yun Tae-gwon sat at his desk and stared at a document he had not read a single word of. Something felt different tonight, and he did not know why. He didn't notice she was gone until the room felt wrong. That was when he understood. She had been filling a space he never acknowledged was empty. January came to Seoul the way it always did. Cold, precise and unannounced. The Foundation's meeting schedule resumed after the holiday pause, and Tae-gwon arrived on the first Tuesday of the new year with the same composure he brought to everything. Tailored suit, measured steps, eyes that moved through rooms and cataloged them before most people had found their seats. He sat down. He opened his folder. He looked up once, the way he always did, the involuntary sweep of a room that had become, without his full awareness, a sweep for one specific person. She wasn't there. He looked back at his folder. The meeting began. Someone spoke about funding allocations. Someone else presented a proposal for a new spring residency program. The room was the same room it had always been, same table, same light, same filtered Seoul winter coming through the high windows. But something was off. He could not name it immediately. That bothered him. He was a man who named things quickly, problems, threats, opportunities, people. The inability to identify a thing was, in his experience, the thing's way of telling you it mattered more than you had admitted. He listened to the meeting, without hearing most of it. Afterward, in the corridor, he stopped his assistant with a single look. "The journalist," he said. "Vera Noelle, is she scheduled for anything this week?" His assistant checked his tablet. "Her formal engagement with the Foundation concluded at the end of last year, sir. I believe she's still in Seoul on a separate commission, but she's not on our calendar." Tae-gwon nodded once. His face said nothing. He walked to his car. He sat in the back seat as the driver pulled into traffic, the city scrolling past the window in gray and silver. And he felt, for the first time in a long time, the specific discomfort of a man who has misplaced something important and is only now checking his pockets. He had grown used to her proximity, without realizing he had grown used to it. That was the problem with things you don't name. You don't know you're holding them until they're gone. She wasn't waiting by the phone. She wasn't replaying their conversations. She was living fully, loudly on her own terms. That detail would haunt him more than anything else. What Tae-gwon did not know, what he could not have known, because he had never asked, because asking would have required admitting he wanted to know, was that Vera's life in Seoul had expanded in the weeks since she released her quiet attachment to what might have been. She had thrown herself back into her work with the specific energy that comes from a person who has made peace with a decision. Her follow-up piece was sharper than the first, deeper in its cultural observation, warmer in its human detail. Her editor had called it the best thing she had written in 2 years. She had started learning to make kimchi jjigae from the grandmother, who lived 2 floors above her in the Mapogu building. A small, deliberate woman who communicated primarily through taste and disapproving sounds, and who had, over the course of 3 Saturday afternoons, clearly decided that Vera was acceptable company. She had gone back to the bridge twice, alone. The way she went to places she loved, fully present, no performance, just herself and the city and the thinking she needed to do. And she had seen Mike Kane 3 times since the Yongsan rooftop. Coffee for the first time, a narrow cafe in Hapjeong where the owner played old fella cutie records and served coffee in ceramic cups made by a local artist. They stayed for 3 hours. She had not noticed the time. The second time, she had watched his documentary cut on a laptop in a borrowed editing suite, and she had given him notes with the same honest directness she gave everyone, and he had laughed at her bluntness and thanked her for it and said most people soften the real thing. I appreciate that you don't. She had appreciated that he appreciated that. The third time, they had walked through Bukshan Hanok village in the early evening, talking about what cities remember and what they choose to forget. Their arms had brushed twice. Neither of them commented. She had come home that night and sat with her feelings honestly, the way she did everything. She liked him, he was good, he was present. She was not betraying anything by feeling that, because nothing had ever been offered to her to betray. He heard the name Mike Kane for the first time on a Wednesday. By Friday, he had heard it 3 more times. The city, it seemed, was trying to tell him something. It started at dinner. Not a personal dinner, a professional one, the kind Tae-gwon attended twice a month as a necessary performance of his legitimate business interests. This one was hosted by a cultural investment group in Gangnam, the sort of event where architects sat beside art collectors and documentary filmmakers, and everyone spoke in the comfortable language of shared aesthetic ambition. He was not listening to most of it. And then, across the table, a woman, a Korean gallerist he vaguely recognized, said a name. Mike Kane's new project is extraordinary. Have you seen the trailer? He's doing this whole series on Afro-Asian urban storytelling. He's been based in Seoul for a few months now, collaborating with local artists. Tae-gwon's attention sharpened without showing it. I saw him at the Yongsan gathering in December, someone else said. He was there with that Kenyan journalist, the one writing about diaspora identity. They seemed very engaged. Light laughter around that end of the table. Tae-gwon picked up his water glass and set it down again. He said nothing. He catalogued the name the way he catalogued everything, filed, flagged, returned to later. That was Wednesday. On Thursday, his foundation's artistic director mentioned, without any awareness of what she was doing, that she had invited a wonderful Ghanaian documentary filmmaker named Mike Kane to speak at the Spring Cultural Forum. She was quite excited about it. On Friday, he passed a poster in the lobby of a building he visited for a meeting. A film screening announcement, bold design, the name Mike Kane in clean typography above an image of a Seoul night skyline. He stood in front of that poster for 4 seconds longer than necessary. Then he walked into his meeting and conducted it with complete composure, and no one in the room would have been able to tell that anything in him had shifted. But something had shifted. He just hadn't decided what to do about it yet. Or rather, he had not yet admitted that there was something to do. He wasn't her anything. He had made sure of that carefully, consistently, and completely, which made what he was feeling right now entirely his own fault. He saw them for the first time on a Saturday afternoon in late January. Not the bridge moment that came later. This was something smaller and in some ways more damaging because it was so ordinary. He was in a car moving through Mapogu on the way to a meeting when he saw them walking on the pavement outside a small bookshop. Vera in a mustard yellow coat he hadn't seen before, Mike Kane beside her, both of them holding coffee cups, both of them mid-conversation in that easy, unguarded way of people who have already passed the stage of trying to impress each other. She laughed at something he said. Not the polite kind. Tae-gwon's driver did not slow down. There was no reason to slow down. They were two people on a pavement, and he was a man in a car moving through a city with somewhere to be. But for approximately 4 seconds, as the car passed, Tae-gwon turned his head and watched. And in those 4 seconds, something moved through him that he recognized, reluctantly, with deep resistance, as pain. Not the clean pain of a professional setback, not the manageable discomfort of an obstacle in his path. This was something older and less organized than that, something he had not felt since he was young enough to still feel things without immediately suppressing them. He turned back to face forward. The meeting he attended that afternoon lasted 2 hours. He made 3 decisions, redirected a failing operation, and spoke approximately 40 sentences, all of them correct, all of them composed. And underneath all of it, like a low-frequency hum that wouldn't stop, 4 seconds on a Mapogu pavement kept replaying. He ate dinner alone that night. He did not taste it. He sat afterward in his apartment, clean lines, expensive furniture, a view of Seoul that most people would describe as extraordinary, and he looked at the city and felt, for the first time in 20 years, that his life was missing something obvious. Something that had been standing in a meeting room, asking about a painting on the wall. And he had just let it walk away. He made a decision. He was going to say something. He had the words. He had her number. He had everything except the 3 seconds of courage it would take to begin. He picked up his phone 4 times that night. He put it down 4 times. February arrived, and Tae-gwon did something he had not done in a very long time. He became uncertain. It was not a comfortable feeling for a man whose entire architecture of self was built on the absence of uncertainty. He moved through it the way he moved through most discomforts, without showing it externally, while internally cataloging every angle of the problem with the focus of a man trying to dismantle something dangerous. The problem was this. He had feelings for Vera Noelle that were no longer deniable, no longer classifiable as professional interest or habitual observation, no longer anything other than what they were. He understood this the way he understood most truths, not gladly, not with celebration, but with the flat acceptance of a man who does not waste energy arguing with reality. The second part of the problem was harder. He had, through consistent and deliberate inaction, created a situation in which she had every rational reason to have moved on. He had given her nothing to hold. He had offered no clarity, no warmth that stepped beyond the professional, no signal that was unmistakable enough to require a response. He had been, in every way that mattered, absent, while present. And she was not a woman who waited for ghosts to become people. He knew that about her. It was, in fact, one of the things he most respected about her. Which meant that if he was going to say something, if he was going to cross the distance he had spent months carefully maintaining, he needed to do it properly. Not with strategy, not with calculation, with something he had very little practice at. Honesty. He picked up his phone on a Tuesday evening and found her name in his contacts, still there from the professional correspondence months ago, and he sat with his thumb above the screen for a long time. He thought about what to say. He put the phone down. He picked it up again. He put it down again. This happened 4 times over the course of an hour, which was 4 more times than Yun Tae-gwon had ever hesitated over anything. On the 5th attempt, he began to type. And his phone rang. A call that needed him. An issue in one of his operations that could not wait until morning. The kind of thing that had, his entire career, always taken precedence over everything personal, because there had never been anything personal that cost him anything to delay. He answered it. He handled it. He told himself he would message her tomorrow. Tomorrow came and went. And the Tuesday after that. And the one after that. Until February became March, and the window he had been circling, cautiously, endlessly, without ever landing, quietly, closed. He had gone to the bridge to think. He had not expected the bridge to answer back. It was a Thursday evening in March. The kind of evening Seoul produces without apology, cold enough to remind you that winter has not fully released its grip, warm enough to suggest that it is considering it. The sky had been threatening rain since midday and had finally made good on its promise around 7, leaving the pavements wet and the neon signs doubled in every puddle like the city was trying to show off. Tae-gwon had not planned to go to the bridge. He had finished a meeting in Mapogu earlier than expected and had told his driver to wait while he walked, something he did occasionally when he needed to think without walls around him. He had turned left out of the building and started walking with no particular destination, and his feet had made the decision his mind had been circling for months. He had found himself on the bridge. He stood in the middle of it the way he had stood there before, hands on the railing, eyes on the city's layered lights, the wet smell of the Han River mixing with rain and traffic, and the distant warmth of something frying in a pajangmatcha somewhere below. He had been standing there for perhaps 10 minutes, not thinking anything specific, just present in the way that place made him present when he heard it. Laughter from the riverside path below the bridge. He looked down without deciding to. And there they were. Vera in the green dress he had never seen before, elegant, simple, catching the neon light in a way that made her visible from a distance, like something the city had decided to illuminate specifically. Her natural hair loose around her face. Her whole posture was open and unhurried. And beside her, Mike Kane, relaxed, leaning slightly toward her, saying something that had produced that laugh. That laugh. The real one, the unguarded one, the one that came from a person who felt completely, utterly safe. Tae-gwon's hands found the railing. He did not move. He stood there and he watched, not with the cold observation of a man in his position cataloging information, but with something raw and unmanaged and entirely human. She tilted her head back slightly as the laugh settled into a smile. And Tae-gwon understood, with a clarity that no amount of strategic thinking had ever produced, exactly what he had done. He had not lost her to another man. He had set her down, carefully and repeatedly, and walked away. And she had simply stopped waiting for him to come back. The rain picked up. He didn't move from the railing for a long time. The most dangerous moment in any man's life is not when he faces an enemy. It is when he faces himself and cannot look away. He did not sleep that night. Not in the restless way of a man with problems to solve. He had always slept through those. He had built a life that ran on his ability to separate emotion from function, to rest when rest was needed regardless of what was happening around him. But this was not a problem he could solve by morning. This was a reckoning. He sat in his apartment, the clean lines, the expensive furniture, the extraordinary view of Seoul spread out beneath him like something he owned. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, the view gave him nothing. He thought about the painting in the foundation meeting room, the one Vera had asked about before she said hello. He thought about the bridge in October, her voice saying it reminds me of a bridge in Nairobi. He thought about the restaurant in November, the rain on the window, the sentence he had opened his mouth to say and then buried when his phone buzzed. He thought about 4 Tuesday evenings with his phone in his hand. He thought about every room she had walked into and how his eyes had found her first. He thought about the laugh from the riverside path. And he sat with all of it, not analyzing it, not strategizing around it, just sitting with it the way you sit with something true that you have been avoiding for a long time, and that has finally caught up with you in a room with no exits. He was not a man who apologized easily. He was not a man who admitted weakness without resistance. He was not a man who had ever, in 41 years, voluntarily placed himself in a position of emotional vulnerability. But he was also, and this was the thing the night was showing him, a man who was tired. Tired of the distance he kept between himself and everything real. Tired of treating his own feelings like classified information that needed to be contained. Tired of a life that was powerful and precise, and empty in a specific way that he had never let himself name, until a woman from Nairobi showed him a bridge and pointed at the lights, and made his city feel like somewhere worth being. He made a decision, somewhere around 3 in the morning. Not a strategic decision. Not a calculated one. Just a true one. He was going to say something. Whatever it cost him. He knew how to command rooms, end negotiations, make men twice his size reconsider their choices with a single look. He had no idea how to say, "I was wrong, and I am sorry, and I think I love you." He was going to have to learn fast. He called the foundation's artistic director the following morning and asked, with the careful indirectness of a man who has not yet fully abandoned all his old habits, whether Vera Noelle was still in Seoul. She was. Her extended commission had another 3 weeks to run. She was presenting at the Cultural Forum in Itaewon the following weekend, the same forum that Mike Cain was speaking at. Tae-gwon thanked his artistic director and ended the call. He sat for a moment. Then he did something he had never done before in a professional context. He asked for help. Specifically, he called a woman named Seo Jeon, a poet and essayist he had funded quietly for years, a person of rare emotional intelligence who had, on 2 or 3 occasions, said things to him that cut through his composure with the precision of someone who had nothing to lose by being honest. She was perhaps the closest thing he had to a friend. He met her for tea in a small place in Insadong, and he told her not everything but enough. The outline of it, a woman, months of saying nothing, a bridge, a laugh from a riverside path. Jeon listened, without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're asking me how to do this." "Yes," he said. It cost him something to say it simply. She looked at him the way people who have known you a long time look at you when you are finally doing something right. "You stop trying to do it correctly," she said. "There is no correction, you just say the true thing, the first true thing, and you let her decide what to do with it." "And if she has already decided?" Jeon picked up her tea. "Then you accept that, and you let her see that you accept it not because you're performing grace, but because she deserves someone who can." He was quiet for a long time. "What if I don't know how to say the truth?" She smiled small, without cruelty. "You just said it to me, start there." He left in Sadong and walked for a long time through the city. Past the Pajangmacha in Mapogu, where she had ordered heatguk 3 mornings in a row in her first week. Past the foundation building, where she had asked about the painting before she said hello. Past the entrance to the lane that led to the bridge. He walked and he practiced, quietly, in the privacy of his own chest, the language of a man learning to be honest. It was harder than anything he had ever done. And it was the most important thing he had ever done. He came to say something, he had the words. He had walked through the door, he had found her across the room. He was 3 steps away, and then he saw her face. And the words almost didn't come. The Cultural Forum was held on a Saturday evening in a converted warehouse space in Itaewon that someone had transformed, with considerable taste, into a warm gathering of exposed brick and soft light, and the kind of crowd that moved through rooms with genuine curiosity rather than performance. Tae-gwon arrived late, deliberately. He had not wanted to sit through the program trying to compose himself. He had needed to arrive already decided, already in motion, with no time to retreat into strategy. He stood at the back of the room during the final panel. Mike Cain was on the panel. He spoke well, grounded, specific, warm in his delivery. The audience responded to him naturally. He was, by every visible measure, a good man. Tae-gwon watched him and felt no hostility. What he felt was something closer to recognition. The particular pain of seeing, clearly and without distortion, what you failed to be for someone. Vera was in the 3rd row. He could see the back of her head, her hair pinned up tonight, a pair of small gold earrings catching the light. When the panel ended and the room broke into conversation, he moved. Through the crowd, past the clusters of guests with wine glasses and animated debates, around the edge of a long table covered in pamphlets and art catalogs. He was perhaps 10 steps from her when she turned, not toward him, toward a woman beside her who had said something that made her smile. That smile. He slowed, involuntarily. She looked, there was no other word for it, good. Not performing happiness. Not the careful brightness of a person managing their emotions in public. She looked like a woman who had made peace with something and was living cleanly on the other side of it. And something in him almost stopped right there. Almost turned around. Almost told himself, she's fine, she doesn't need this. Leave her to what she has. 3 steps away. He stopped. And then Ji-yeon's voice came back to him across the noise of the room. You just say the true thing. The first true thing. He closed the 3 steps. Vera. She turned. For a moment, a single, suspended moment, something moved across her face that she did not fully hide. Surprise. And beneath it, something older and more complicated that she recovered from quickly. Tae-gwon, she said, calm even herself. I need to say something to you, he said. I know this is not the right place. I know I don't have the right to take your time. But I have been holding something for a very long time, and I think I have done both of us damage by holding it, and I would rather say it badly than not say it at all. She looked at him. Not with warmth, not with coldness, with the clear, honest attention of a woman who is deciding whether to open a door. Say it, she said. This is not the part where everything is magically fixed. This is the part where 2 people, imperfect and clear-eyed, decide to try, and that decision is braver than anything else in this story. He said it outside. They had moved without discussing it, a mutual, wordless agreement to step away from the noise of the forum, through a side door and onto a narrow outdoor terrace that overlooked a quiet Itaewon street. The city below was lit and moving. The air was cold and clean. Someone had left a heater on the terrace that burned orange in the corner like a small, patient fire. Tae-gwon stood with his hands at his sides, not clenched, not performing composure, just still, open in the way that cost something. And he told her the truth. Not a declaration constructed for effect, not a speech designed to achieve a particular outcome, just the actual thing in the order it had happened inside him. That she had walked into a room and asked about a painting, and he had noticed her before she finished the sentence. That he had found himself returning to a bridge, she showed him, because it was the place in his city that felt most like her. That there had been a dinner in November, and a sentence he had started and abandoned, and 4 Tuesday evenings with his phone in his hand, and a Thursday night on a bridge in the rain when he had watched her laughing below and understood, with a completeness that nothing in his professional life had ever produced, exactly what his silence had cost. That he was not there to ask her to choose him over anything or anyone. That he understood, completely, if she had moved forward, and that moving forward was exactly what she should have done, and that he was not standing in front of her to produce an outcome. He was standing in front of her because he had spent his entire life treating honesty as a liability, and she had, without trying, without asking, made him want to be a different kind of man. And he thought she deserved to know that, even if it changed nothing. He stopped talking. The heater burned orange between them. The city moved below. Vera was quiet for a long moment, not the silence of a woman stalling, but the silence of a woman thinking honestly, which was the only kind of thinking she did. You know what the hardest part was, she said finally, her voice steady and clear. Tell me, he said. It wasn't the waiting, I've been patient before. It was that I could feel that you felt something, and you still chose silence. Every time. That's not distance, Tae-gwon, that's a decision. I know, he said, no defense, no explanation, just I know. She looked at him for a long time. Mike and I, she said slowly, we are something real. I'm not going to pretend otherwise or minimize it to make this easier. What we have is honest and good, and I am not going to hurt him carelessly. I'm not asking you to, he said. I know you're not, she said. That's actually new from you. Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, more like a door that was not fully closed. I'm not making any decisions tonight, she said. What you've said, I need to sit with it honestly, the way I sit with everything. That's all I'm asking, he said. She nodded once. Then she looked at him with those clear, direct eyes, the same eyes that had looked at a painting before saying hello, that had pointed at city lights from a bridge and talked about Nairobi, that had never once tried to read him as a symbol. You should have talked to me in November, she said, not cruelly, just true. I know, he said again. I'm talking to you now. The corner of her mouth moved, barely, but it moved. She went back inside. He stayed on the terrace for a while, hands in his pockets, looking at the city that she had taught him to see differently. He did not get an answer that night, or the next day, or the day after that. He waited not with strategy, not with calculation, but with the genuine patience of a man who had finally understood that some things could not be controlled into happening. They could only be made worthy of. Vera sat with everything honestly, the way she always did. She had a long conversation with Mike, the kind of honest, respectful conversation that two people can only have when they both have enough self-respect to tell the truth. It was not easy, but it was clean. And Mike Kane, who was a good man in all the ways that mattered, heard her and responded with the grace of someone who understood that real feeling could not be argued with. 3 weeks later, on an April evening when Seoul had finally released winter and the city smelled like something beginning, Vera walked into the foundation building. She went up to the 14th floor. She knocked on the door of the office she had never formally been invited into. He opened it. She looked at him, clear, decided, fully awake to what she was doing. You said you wanted to say something in November, she said. I think I'm ready to hear the whole thing now. He stepped back from the door. She walked in. And for the first time in a very long time, in that clean, quiet office above the city, they had both learned to see differently. Yun Tae-gwon said everything he meant. And Vera Noelle listened and responded. And what grew from that conversation was not a rescue, not a grand gesture, not a story with fireworks and declarations. It was something quieter and stronger and more real than any of that. It was two people, imperfect, honest, clear-eyed, choosing each other, with full awareness of what that choice meant, and meaning every word of it, for every heart that stayed until the end. This story was never really about a mafia boss. It was about something most of us have lived, the cost of silence, the damage of waiting for the right moment that we keep creating reasons to delay, the way we sometimes hold our truest feelings like classified information, convinced that protecting them is the same as honoring them. It isn't. Yun Tae-gwon was powerful in every room except the one that mattered most, the room inside himself. And Vera Noelle taught us something equally important, that dignity is not the same as coldness. She felt everything. She hoped. She waited a reasonable time. And when what she deserved didn't arrive, she did not collapse. She did not beg. She moved forward not to punish him, not to prove a point, but because she understood that her life was not a waiting room. Here is what this story wants to leave with you. Say the true thing, not when it's perfect, not when you've constructed it correctly, not when the timing is ideal. The timing will never be ideal. Say it now imperfectly with your whole chest, because the person in front of you deserves your honesty more than they deserve your composure. And if you are the one who waited too long, it is not always too late. But the only currency that matters now is truth, not strategy, not grand gestures, just the plain, undefended, costly truth of what you feel and what you regret and what you are willing to change. And if you are Vera, your peace is not a consolation prize. Your decision to keep living fully, to receive good things, to refuse to shrink yourself while someone else figures out their feelings, that was never a weakness. That was the bravest thing in this entire story. Some loves arrive late. The ones worth having arrive honest. If this story moved something in you, if you heard yourself in any part of it, let us know in the comments. We read every single one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. We'll be back with another story that sits with you long after it ends. Until then, say the true thing while you still can. Thank you for listening. See you in the next video.